Good afternoon. Welcome to the Naropa University Performing Arts Center. It's a pleasure for us today to introduce to you Dr. Fania Davis, who will be more fully introduced in a moment. So I get to introduce the introducer, which I always like. But my primary job is to welcome you to the John and Bayard Cobb Peace Lecture, and particularly to thank John, who is here with us. John, do you mind just recognizing? So John and I go back a long way. He was a predecessor of mine as Naropa president, actually president twice. He was a partner of mine in the law firm that we had. We think probably the only all-Buddhist law firm that ever existed in the United States. We didn't make any money, which I don't think has anything to do with our spiritual path, but nonetheless. And has been an incredibly generous donor to Naropa in so many ways, but particularly by endowing this annual Peace Lecture, which has allowed us to bring people to the Naropa community who are doing remarkable work internationally in the areas of social justice and equity. And it's a real joy for us to be able to host this lecture every year. I've mentioned this, I think, once before in another conversation, but I thought a lot post-November about the founding of Naropa and the times that we were living in when Naropa was founded in 1974. And I'm back. All right. Being censored by somebody. For many of us, we were talking about Naropa and founding Naropa from 1972 on at a time that many of us were also very involved in political activism. And I think that the power of the work that we did together to create this institution in 1974 was all the stronger because there was no issue at all about bringing our activism and that zeal and that commitment and that passion to the creation of this institution. And I think that for many of us, the times that we are in now may be the sort of next great dramatic moment in world history, where those of us that were activists are kind of feeling somehow reignited even in our old age. And I know for a fact, because I have the opportunity to actually teach a class on social innovation and entrepreneurship at Naropa, I know for a fact that students that are coming in the door today carry that same passion and that same commitment, which is something that I'm really pleased about. And it's one of the reasons that, although unexpected, my coming here as Naropa president 5 years ago was such a joy and continues to be. So I feel that it's a moment for us, and Dr. Davis actually is the sort of perfect person to note that. So I want to welcome you, thank John, and I want to introduce our Peace Studies student, Farida Ndiaye, who is going to introduce Dr. Davis.
Hello. I actually can't see as well, which is great. Hello and welcome everyone. I'm Farida Ndiaye, Peace Studies major, and I will be a senior at the end of this upcoming semester. On behalf of Naropa students, I'm honored. Sorry, I'm a little nervous. On behalf of Naropa students, I'm honored and know we're all really excited to invite Fania Davis here. I'm sure you've all read her bio, but I'd like to say a few words. Dr. Fania Davis is the co-founder and director of Restorative Justice for Oakland Youth and a national thought leader in the field. She is a social justice activist, a restorative justice scholar, professor, and civil rights attorney with a PhD in Indigenous knowledge. She has apprenticed with traditional healers around the globe, particularly in Africa. The Los Angeles Times named Dr. Davis a new civil rights leader of the 21st century. Many of us at Naropa are interdisciplinary in our studies, and what an incredible opportunity to be in the presence of a woman who embodies so much of what we aspire to. As Naropa students, part of our work is also honoring our personal journey. And so I'd like to end by saying that Fania is also a mother, a grandmother, a dancer, a yoga and Qigong practitioner. So please welcome me in joining Fania Davis to the stage.
Thank you so much, Frida. Thank you. Beautiful. Thank you so much. It's really good to be here. It feels like home in so many ways. There's a lot of shared sensibilities on so many levels. I am grateful to be invited to deliver the Bayard and John Cobb Peace Lecture and to join the esteemed roster of scholars and activists, including my friend Dr. Pumla Gobodo-Madikizela, Professor John Paul Lederich, and Sister Helen Perjan. I am grateful to the Cobbs. I am grateful to President Charles Leaf, who in his first letter to me mentions that he shares a small part of my family's lineage. He went to the same university as my sister Angela Davis did, and he also worked for the Cleveland Browns the very same year that they drafted my brother Ben Davis. I feel really blessed to know President Leaf, whose life has been dedicated to the uplift of the historically marginalized and to social transformation via social entrepreneurship. And I was just so pleased to hear about the cafeteria that apparently was your baby, your brainchild. The community kitchen, and is it Bridge, what is it? Bridge House Foundation. An enterprise that employs formerly incarcerated and homeless people. So I want to just acknowledge you for that. I think you're very, very fortunate and blessed and privileged to have a president who embodies this deep, lifelong commitment to social transformation, as well as a commitment to spirituality. Let me say that in turn, I share part of the lineage of Naropa. I got my PhD in Indigenous Studies from the California Institute of Integral Studies, which, like Naropa, integrates Eastern and Western insights in education, and which, like Naropa, understands and acknowledges that we learn in multiple ways, not just cerebrally, not just intellectually, but through the body, through emotions, through the spirit. And secondly, my program was ended. There were financial issues, and unfortunately, our program, Indigenous Mind Program, had to go. But we ended up being housed by you, Naropa University. That was after I graduated. So there's definitely a kinship there. And I want to honor all of you students here. You are here. I looked at the website, and there's a facts you should know about Naropa. And I learned that of other students at universities across the country, sectarian universities, you are some of the most creative, compassionate, values-driven, tolerant, spiritual, and social and environmental justice-oriented students in the nation. So I want to acknowledge you. You are here because you want to end suffering on personal levels and suffering caused by systems. Suffering caused by racism, by misogyny, by homophobia, transphobia, Islamophobia, globalized capitalism, environmental degradation, poverty, war, racial and police violence. Is there any way we can bring up the lights just a little bit, because I'm not seeing anybody. Oh, thank you. Oh, thank you. Yes. So in restorative justice, connection is really important, and That's why I don't like to stand behind the podium, and I definitely like to see you. And you know, Boulder is in the news in other ways as well, right? That I'm not quite as excited about with the confirmation of your fellow Boulderite, Neil Gorsuch, to the Supreme Court. I wish to also honor the ancestors of this land upon which we stand, the Arapaho and the Ute people. It's important, I think, that we begin in this way because this is the land of those of the Arapaho. This is the land of the Ute. This is an occupied land upon which we stand. This is a post-genocidal land upon which we stand. And like the original harm of slavery, we have yet to tell the truth about that genocide and about that slavery. We have yet to take responsibility fully as a nation for it. We have yet to take action to make amends and transform the harm to the degree possible. We are a nation born in the blood of the unspeakable trauma of genocide and slavery, an original wound that we have yet to heal. Our government is quick to point the finger of blame at other nations that are seen to be pervasive human rights abusers, that are seen to be terrorists, that are seen to be genociders. Yet, as an old African proverb says, when you point the finger of blame at someone else, what's that?
Millions are pointing right back at you.
That's right. And your three fingers, your own three fingers, are pointing back at you. Or don't point a finger of blame with dirty fingers. So more than 500 years ago, we perpetrated this abomination of slavery, of genocide, and then 400 years ago, this abomination of slavery. And as I said, it's an original wound that is yet to heal. The past is not dead. In fact, as has been said, the past is not even past. It remains today in the form of racial terror, in the form of police violence, in the form of racialized mass incarceration. Germany has done much more than we have as a nation to take responsibility for the harm that it committed. There are thousands of memorials so that no one will ever forget what happened. There are the stepping stones. On the cobblestones in the streets are dotted with memorials to those who were lost. There are major museums. They even offer reparations checks to those who have been hurt by the Holocaust. Their curricula has been completely transformed. Children are required to travel all over the country and visit the memorials and learn from the memorials. There is a curriculum that is completely transformed, and teachers are required every year to do continuing education so that they can teach this curriculum even better. We are beginning to see the bubbling up of truth and reconciliation processes in our nation, and restorative justice is playing an important role in the healing that needs to happen. So this is a great time to be alive. It was a great time in the 60s and 70s when President Leaf and I were very active. And some might say, it's a great time. What do you mean it's a great time? We've got an Islamophobe and a transphobe and a xenophobe and a climate change denier. And I could go on, and a racist and a misogynist who is occupying the most powerful position in the world. How can this be such a great time? It's a great time because of what President Leaf talked about. It's a time of activism the likes of which we haven't seen since the 60s. one of the most amazing things about the Obama administration, his 8 years, is all of the movements that bubbled up during that time, starting with Occupy, the LGBTQ, Indian Rock, Black Lives Matter, and on and on and on. And of course, historically, it's youth who make the changes. We were youth during the 60s when we went to the March on Washington, when we took over school administration buildings to demand Black studies and ethnic studies. And it was the youth in Alabama who were braving the dogs and who were braving the fire hoses. Actually, it was like 6- and 7-year-olds in Birmingham who were braving the fire hoses and the dogs. It was a youth who started the sit-in movement that began in North Carolina. It was a youth at Stonehenge? Stonewall, sorry. It was a youth at Stonewall whose actions led to the winning of LGBTQ rights. It is, historically, we look all over the world and it's usually the youth who bring about the massive changes that are needed. It's also an amazing time because we're seeing a receding of binary, splitting, either or, good, bad, right, wrong ways of thinking. We're seeing an emergence of more integrative and unitive ways of being present in the world. Restorative justice is a very good example of that, where we bring together persons who have lost their loved ones to violence with the persons who have killed their loved ones, and some reconciliation and some healing occurs. So restorative justice is creating these unlikely alliances and connections and friendships and bonds, which is relatively new, which is new, I would say, historically. And I was just at Northwestern, the law school there in Chicago, and that conference was entitled Healing Justice. We have not only conferences about healing justice, but we have these incredible developments in the law. I remember when I first heard about healing justice, it seemed kind of like oxymoronic to me, right? Those two terms together, those two words together in a single term. Well, today we have lawyers who practice collaborative law, who practice transformational law, who practice spirituality and the law, who practice, of course, restorative justice, who practice holistic law and therapeutic jurisprudence. This is new. This is new. When I go to law schools now, I actually do Qigong, I actually do yoga, you know? That was never the case when I was in law school at UC Berkeley. And when I was at Northwestern at the Healing Justice Conference, it began with drumming, with Native American drumming from the ancestors of that land, with prayers from the elders, with chants, Native American chants. Probably the first time ever at Northwestern Law School. So this wasn't even imaginable when I was going to school. This is new, and it's an exciting time for that reason. I just spoke at a yoga and social justice conference. So, you know, that's relatively new as well, right? That was the first one I had ever spoken at, and I understand that there are more of these yoga and social justice sort of conferences or meditation and social justice developments all over the country. So, you know, this is an exciting time, as I say, and a lot of new things are going on. Although you've been talking about social justice and spirituality here for a while, right? From the very beginning. So you, in many ways, actually pioneered this development that is really bubbling up in a big way today. And what makes this new for me personally is that I was a closet yogi and a closet meditator for many years. Because, when I was a Marxist, when I was working with the Black Panther Party, when I was this militant fighter, adopting a very, combative stance, and even as a trial lawyer, meditation, yoga, it was seen as a sign of weakness. It was seen as a sign of sort of adopting metaphysical ways of being present in the world, which were frowned upon by us Marxists who were dialectical materialists. So it's a great time for me because I get to be who I am. I don't have to be in the closet as a meditator and as a spiritualist any longer. I can be both a warrior and a meditator, a warrior and a healer. And let me talk a little bit about my personal journey, a little bit more. I was born in Birmingham, Alabama. You may know it as Birmingham, but we experienced it as Birmingham because this was a place, the most segregated city in the South at the time, where the civil rights movement was beginning to emerge, and the response of the Ku Klux Klan, the White Citizens Council, and other regressive elements in the white community was terror, was to engage in racial terror by burning our homes, the homes of those who were active in the civil rights movement, by bombing homes, and that's how it got the name Birmingham, Alabama. Many people know about the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church, September 15, 1963, but this was one of many, many bombings. My neighborhood was Dynamite Hill. That's where I lived in Birmingham. That's part of my origin story. That's part of who I am. And it was called Dynamite Hill because we were one of the first Black families to move into a previously all-white neighborhood. And the response was bombing. We were fortunate. Bombs never struck our home, but they struck the homes of families all around us. And we often were wakened in the wee hours of the morning by the terrifying sounds of bombs exploding. My father and other fathers in the neighborhood armed themselves to protect themselves. And my sister remembers, I was too young, but she remembers there were times when my father heard noises and grabbed his gun and went downstairs to make sure that there were no Klanners lurking in the bushes and to protect his family. I went to a church just a block or so from my home. We had some interracial meetings there. That church was bombed it was burned because of those interracial meetings. Just across the street from the church was the home of attorney Arthur D. Shores, an amazing civil rights lawyer who worked with Thurgood Marshall to bring down the system of segregation through litigation. His home was bombed twice. And when I was 15 years old, two of my best friends, Cynthia Wesley and Carol Robertson, were killed at Sunday school in the Birmingham Sunday school bombing in September of 1963. So those experiences, coming out of the South, being active in the civil rights movement, and directly experiencing the racial terrorism of the time, created this deep yearning inside of me to do all that I could do and be all that I could be to create a different kind of world. So I left the South and the civil rights movement and joined many other movements. I joined the Black nationalist movement. I was active with the Black Panthers. I joined the Black student movement. I joined the socialist movement, the women's movement, the anti-apartheid movement, economic justice movements, and every major movement of my time I was a part of. I was a warrior for justice. I shouldn't say was. And My sister Angela Davis was targeted by then Ronald Reagan, then Governor Ronald Reagan, and President Richard Nixon. Because of her political activities, she was charged with capital murder, kidnapping, and conspiracy. And she was a target of one of the biggest woman hunts in history. She was on the 10 most wanted list. And of course, with a massive movement that I was a part of organizing all over the world, she was freed. But yes. And that taught me more than anything else that the people have the power. Nixon was not happy. There's a film, by the way, you might want to take a look at it. It's called Free Angela Davis and All Political Prisoners. Have you seen it? Oh, a few of you have. Great. Well, I highly recommend it. I think you can find it on Netflix. But at the end, you hear Nixon cursing under his breath. You know, he's so upset that the jury acquitted her. The filmmaker was amazing because she did this incredible research. So she found the tapes, because Nixon taped everything, every conversation, right? Which came back and bit him. But he's cursing up a storm. She was guilty. Why the F did they let her go? And he was very upset because they had definitely planned to eliminate Angela and execute her. But it was the power of the people all over the world that stopped it. I traveled all over the world to Paris at l'Arc de Triomphe, at La Place de la Bastille. I spoke to 60,000 people. In Rome, I spoke to about 20,000 people. In London, in Chile, in Russia then, the Soviet Union. In many, many countries, there were just tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of people who were demanding the freedom of Angela Davis, and that's why she is free today. My husband, when I was in my early 20s, probably a little bit older than most of the students here, when we were working with the Black Panther Party, was shot by police and almost killed because of our work in the Black Panther Party. And that only deepened my commitment to social transformation. I became a trial lawyer after Angela's case to fight against racism in the courts. And after about 30 years of being an activist and a trial lawyer, I began to feel out of balance. To be successful in those arenas, had to cultivate hyper-rationalist, hyper-masculinist, hyper-aggressive personal qualities. That's what I had to do. I had to be angry, had to be combative. And that, after 30 years, mid-90s, left me out of balance, and I knew intuitively from dreams and synchronistic occurrences that I was being invited to bring more healing and spiritual and creative energies into my life. And for me, it was clear that if I didn't do this, I would die. I could not continue the way that I was. Too much solar energy and not enough lunar. Too much fire, not enough water. And so I was intuitively and sort of synchronistically guided to the program at California Institute of Integral Studies, Recovery of Indigenous Mind. And that allowed me to study with healers all over the world, including in Africa, and mostly in Africa. And after getting the PhD and returning from Africa, I came back and I learned about restorative justice. I learned about restorative justice from a district attorney by the name of Ronnie Earl in Austin, Texas. And he had been targeted multiple times for defeat in the elections, but was able to win because he had been able to reduce crime through restorative justice. So learning about this justice that heals, instead of adding to the original harm, adding one harm or another harm to the original harm, it seeks to heal harm. Learning about this justice that seeks to create peace rather than deepen conflict. Learning about this justice that is a healing ground and not a battleground was an epiphany for me, because for the first time, I felt I could be lawyer, warrior, and healer. I could be all of those things at once. It was a very important step in my own movement toward wholeness personally. And from the time that I heard about restorative justice, I began to just sort of devour the literature. I went to conferences, and one of the conferences I went to was in Colombia, South America, where I met Dr. Pumla Gobodo Madikizela. And that was a conference that was organized to explore how we could use restorative justice to bring peace in Colombia, which is now finally emerging in Colombia. And I also started an organization called Restorative Justice for Oakland Youth, or RJOY. I'd like to get the PowerPoint going now, just to talk about a little bit more about what restorative justice is. Thank you. I'm going to get a little water here. I didn't realize until I started waking up in the middle of the night last night, every hour or so, that I probably had a little altitude sickness, and I needed to drink more water. So if you will bear with me. Oh, by the way, how many of you, I understand there are a lot of restorative justice practitioners in the audience. Can you raise your hands if you do restorative justice? Wonderful. Wonderful. How many of you are, bless you, how many of you are practicing restorative justice in schools? Great. Great. And in the justice system? Great. And in other arenas? Okay. You know, I travel all over the country, and I would say that there's probably more restorative justice practitioners in this audience proportionally than in any other audience that I've spoken to. Yeah. So Colorado is clearly a pioneer in this work. And I know especially about the work in schools because that's the work that I started in Oakland. So thank you so much, all of you who do this wonderful work. Somebody may need to, okay, let's see. Oops. So, I don't know how that happened. I just pressed a button. Oh, there we are, okay. Can you tell me which one I need to press in order to? Okay, great, okay. Okay, so restorative justice is a worldview rooted in indigenous principles, and it's a theory of justice that emphasizes bringing together everyone affected by wrongdoing to address their needs and responsibilities and to heal the harm as much as possible. So first, restorative justice is a worldview. Many people think of restorative justice as a conflict resolution modality, as something that you put into play after harm has occurred or after conflict has occurred. Can we bring up the lights just a little bit more again? Seems like they got dimmer. So it's important to know that, or to understand that restorative justice is not solely a conflict resolution method, but it is a way of being present in the world. It's a way of being, it's a way of knowing, based on indigenous principles, and especially on the fundamental indigenous insight that we all participate in this luminous web of wholeness. It is rooted in the fundamental principle that understands reality to be comprised not of things and atoms that are disconnected, but of relationships. It is also a theory of justice, and it is inclusive, It brings together everyone affected by wrongdoing, the person causing harm and the person harmed, and the community that might be harmed, family members of the parties. Everyone comes together. It's not just professionals in a courtroom in a very hierarchical setting. It is about shifting the locus of the justice process from systems and professionals to community and ordinary people. It's a needs-based justice. We ask, what are the needs and responsibilities of the persons affected by harm? And it is about healing the harm, not adding to the harm, as I mentioned earlier. You could say that our system of justice is based on the Roman notion of just deserts. If I cause you harm, then that creates an imbalance in the scales of justice, and the only way to rebalance the scales is for me to be caused like harm. So you could say that ours is a system that harms people who harm people, to show that harming people is wrong. And all that does is replicate and reproduce harm until harm saturates our very existence. Another way to understand restorative justice is to do this exercise. What are the three questions that restorative justice asks, and what are the three questions that retributive justice asks? Retributive justice asks what law was broken, who broke it, and what punishment is deserved. We're very focused on blame and judgment. Restorative justice asks a different set of questions. Does anyone want to kind of take a pass, not a stab, I was about to say a stab, a pass at articulating the three questions that restorative justice asks? Maybe just one. How does restorative justice, or what are the questions that it asks as opposed to what was the law that was broken, who broke it, what punishment is deserved? Restorative justice asks, give me just one question.
Who's a stakeholder, who was affected?
Yes, who was harmed? What's the harm? Absolutely. Second question? Yes.
What led that person to want to cause harm in the first place?
And another way of saying that might be, what are the needs and responsibilities of the persons affected by harm? And the last question, how do we heal the harm? Oh, I stole your thunder? Sorry. Okay. So, who was harmed? What are the needs and responsibilities of everyone impacted? And how do all impacted come together to address, I'll read this, it's cut off, needs and responsibilities, and to heal the harm as much as possible? Another way that you can understand the difference between retributive and restorative justice is through this anecdote. Imagine that you're in the center of town in Boulder. I'm not sure where that is. Is there a town center near here? Huh? Pearl Street, okay, yeah. So imagine you're at Pearl Street, and you see an older woman, even older than me, with three children that appear to be her grandchildren. And she's got a purse hanging off her arm, and then suddenly a youth basically bum rushes her, knocks her to the ground, and grabs her purse and runs. You could say that our system runs over the poor grandmother and past the three children who are petrified and traumatized to go after the young man who caused the harm, to blame, to judge, to punish. Victims very rarely have a say in our system of justice. And if they don't support the prosecutor, then they have no say at all. Restorative justice would do probably what you would do. And what you would do is you would go first to the grandmother. Does she need CPR? Does she need 911? Do we need to call 911? What are her needs? And then once you take care of her needs, you look at the children and calm them down, take care of their needs. And restorative justice also asks, what are the responsibilities of the young man? And also, what are his needs? You know. It may be that the larger system, not to excuse what the young man has done, but it may be that the larger society has some responsibility. If this young man is stealing a purse because he doesn't have food on his table. So restorative justice asks all of those questions and is concerned in a balanced way about the needs and responsibilities of persons causing harm, persons who have been harmed, and the entire community that's impacted by the harm. It is not simply offender-focused in the way that our justice system is. We already talked about the indigenous origins. Well, I didn't say this, but the restorative justice movement started about 40 years ago in Kitchener, Ontario. That was the first recorded restorative justice case involving some young men who had, on a drunken spree, vandalized homes and churches and cars. And that was in 1974. Also in the mid-'70s, just a little bit later, the first recorded case was in this country was in Indiana. However, it's an old way of doing justice. It's based on indigenous ways of doing justice. Inclusivity, a concern with the collective and not just with a single individual. And its affirmation that we are one. And that there's no bright line separating persons causing harm from persons who have been harmed. I try not to use the terms victim and offender. I don't know how you other practitioners out there feel. But from our experience, we see that there, but for the grace of God go I, right? We find, for example, a young man who cursed out his teacher and became very combative with her at school. And had the punitive disciplinary system had its way, he simply would have been expelled or suspended, because that system asks what rule was violated, who did it, and what punishment is deserved. Well, little Tommy violated the rule against cursing out teachers, and suspension for that is 5 days. But with our work in the schools in Oakland, we were able to use a restorative justice process. And rather than suspend the child, no questions asked, the principal allowed our restorative justice coordinator to take the young man to the restorative justice room. The young man was angry, you know. He was even about to strike the restorative justice coordinator, who was so upset. We're going to call your mama. I don't care if you call my mama. And he even acted as if he was going to strike the restorative justice coordinator. Restorative justice coordinator said, man, you know, I'm just trying to help you here, you know. Are you okay? And with that question, for the first time, he calmed down. The principal had been telling him, we're going to suspend you, we're going to call your mama, you're going to be out of here for 5 days. And that just amped him up even more. But as soon as the restorative justice coordinator said, are you okay? No, I'm not okay. So the restorative justice coordinator takes him to the room, peacemaking room, and discovers that the young man's mother has been absent for the last 3 days. She's relapsed. And he's got 2 siblings, younger siblings, that he has been actually dressing and feeding and getting them to school. And this is the 3rd day, and he doesn't know how long he can do this. So when the teacher tells him to raise your head because he's asleep on the desk, he's tired, and she tells him 3 times, the last time yelling at him, he jumps up at her and yells back. When the principal hears the story, the backstory, and restorative justice gets the backstory, he says, we were about to put this child in the streets when what he deserves is a medal. And if we had suspended him, even one suspension by the time you're in 9th grade triples the chance that you will be incarcerated. It doubles the chance that you will drop out. And if you drop out, you're going to be incarcerated. The odds are so great that you will be incarcerated. 75% of the inmates in state prisons around the country are high school dropouts. So one of the greatest protective factor against incarceration is keeping kids in school. So we were able to have a circle. I'm glad we have a little one in here. Yeah. So we were able to have a circle. The teacher was able to hear Tommy's story. She herself had been traumatized because the year before, someone had attacked her. A student had attacked her. And with this happening with Tommy, she was ready to call it quits. She was ready to quit teaching. But when she learned his story, her heart softened. And she realized that in the future, she took responsibility. And she realized that in the future, rather than calling out a student in front of everybody else in the class, as she did with Tommy, she will discreetly ask the child to step out and what's happening with you? Are you okay? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Some compassion, absolutely. And this is a classic example of why I don't use the words victim and offender, because this child, Tommy, you could say was both an offender because he cursed out the teacher, acted like he was going to strike the teacher, but he was also a victim. So that's that. We were able to do the circle and come up with a plan after each party heard the other stories. We had the mother there as well. We had some students who had been impacted. And a plan came out of that circle that everybody was involved in to heal the harm and to prevent its recurrence to the degree possible. So one of the terms of the agreement was that the mother would seek rehabilitation services, and the school helped her with that. The teacher, I told you what she learned from this. And Tommy was helpful to this. He did some chores for the teacher for a couple of weeks, and that was an example of how we heal harm instead of replicate harm, which would have happened had he been suspended. Because restorative justice is a set of values, a philosophy, a worldview, and a way of life, it can be applied in many different contexts. It can be used for schools, for the justice system, for policing, for communities, for mass social conflict. And when Dr. Madikizela was here, she told you about how restorative justice was used to heal the wounds of mass social conflict in South Africa. A little data here. In a prison, or actually a jail in San Francisco, called RSVP, Resolve to Stop the Violence, a Harvard study showed that persons going through this program were 20% less likely to reoffend violently compared to those who did not. In Oakland, we have a diversion program in the juvenile justice system and that's been going on for about 7 or so years. And studies show that our youth reoffend at the rate of 11% versus 75% if you are incarcerated. Mm-hmm. And you know, that always blows my mind that we continue to put so much money into incarceration and not education. Even though we know how unsuccessful incarceration is in rehabilitating persons incarcerated. And we know that it creates more criminality, and yet we spend billions and billions of dollars on it. In New Zealand passed a law back in 1989 which required the system to allow youth to go through a restorative justice program instead of the criminal justice system, except in cases of homicide. And that was in 1989. Basically, youth incarceration is becoming obsolete in New Zealand. Yeah. They're shutting down youth locked facilities. Then there's some great studies on satisfaction of persons harmed, as well as a satisfaction of the persons who caused harm. But victims show reduced post-traumatic stress syndrome after sitting down and meeting the persons who harmed them, because not knowing the persons who have harmed them, they create a monster. And then when they sit in a circle in a safe space, then they see that this young man, he was abused as a child, you know. This young man had no caring adult, not a single caring adult in his life. And that's why this young man wrote graffiti, Nazi and fascist graffiti, on the wall of the church. That's why this young man ended up leading an antisocial existence. So just the ability to encounter the person who caused you harm and hear their stories, you know the power of story, right? Yeah. Once you hear someone's story, it connects you in very deep ways. And the process itself that we use, the circle process, is a process that creates connections in ways that we don't ordinarily do. When we have teachers, and those of you who do restorative justice have heard this many times before, when we do trainings and we do all of our community building and trust building exercises where we share stories, the teachers will say, I've been working with this person for 10 years, and in these last 2 hours, I feel more connected to them. I know more about them than I'd ever known before. Let's see, I'm going to just move through these pretty quickly. Let me just tell you about the work about the development of the work in the schools. We started with a single pilot program. You know what? I would like for all of you guys to get up for a moment. Yeah. And just do what y'all do here in Naropa, right? Some stretching. Praises to the heavens above. Yes. Yeah. And I know you can't move too much laterally, but if you move together, you might be able to, you know? Right. And do whatever your body needs. And I don't know if you can go down if you're too close to the chair in front of you. If you can't go down, then do something else that your body needs and wants. Praises to Mother Earth. And then can we just shake? Shake. Yeah. Arms up, shake. Arms down, shake. If you can go up and down a little bit. And then shake your booty. Yeah. Great, great. Yeah. Yeah. If you want to keep standing, if your body needs that, just keep standing. Right, right. And you know, I think I'm going to, after I just tell you about how we were able to make restorative justice public policy in the schools, let's open it up for questions. How much time do we have?
Until 1:30. We have 25 minutes.
Okay, perfect. All right, so we started with a small pilot program in probably one of the most crime-ridden areas of Oakland and under-resourced areas of Oakland. And the school district didn't even know what we were doing. We got some money from the city's violence prevention program. And within almost a year and a half, we saw amazing results. Kids, when they were having conflicts on the playground, came inside to the peacemaking room and said, Miss Alfred, who was the restorative justice director, we need a talking piece. We need to sit down and talk this out. They learned to talk out their differences rather than fight them out. And we were able to completely eliminate violence at the school. We were able to bring suspensions down 87%. And that's so important when it comes to interrupting the school to prison pipeline, as I was indicating earlier, because a suspension puts you into that pipeline. So by using alternatives to suspension, we were able to interrupt that process for many of our students. But we also used restorative justice to build community, not just after harm had occurred, but at the tier 1 level. We used restorative justice to, for example, in a classroom, Miss Awele, the drama teacher, starts her class off every day with a 10-minute circle. It doesn't cut into her teaching time significantly. Some teachers said, we don't have time to do restorative justice. But teachers realized after they saw the results that they don't have time not to do it. Let's talk about what happened in Miss Awele's class. So Miss Awele had her students in a circle, and the question for the round, she did a little opening, probably a song or a quote, and she had a talking piece. And the question was, is there anything that we need to know about you today? How are you doing today? So the talking piece goes from person to person. And then Johnny says, my cousin got put in jail last night. He lives with me. And then Sue said, a few students later, says there was a shootout just outside of my bedroom window last night, and I'm still shaking. When students come into the classroom, they're like this, having experienced this kind of trauma, they're on high alert. They're in their back brain. They're having a fight, flight, or freeze response. They're so busy scanning the environment for threats that they're not able to settle down and learn. And they're more likely to cause harm in the classroom. But just this 10-minute circle, when they share what has happened, and when their classmates embrace them and give them comfort and solace, and when their teacher acknowledges them and holds them, they can come into a more settled state, moving into the front brain where they can access executive functioning and be ready to learn. So just those few minutes will create a completely different environment in the class. So not only are we doing circles as an alternative to suspensions once harm has occurred, but to build community and to build trust and to create a climate of connectivity and healing. The talking piece also allows our youth to feel heard, because when you're holding the talking piece in circle, you're the only one speaking. No one else gets to speak. They get to listen deeply and from their hearts. And you holding the talking piece, you get to speak respectfully and deeply and from the heart. And we have circles with police chief, with the mayor, with the judge, with teachers, folks in authority. But when we use this process, when we implement it with fidelity, our students come out saying, yeah, that was a good circle. I felt heard. I felt seen. I felt like the adults weren't trying to talk down to me. And just that simple dynamic is making all the difference for our children. because they feel seen, they feel heard, they feel a sense of belonging. In the past, teachers, unfortunately, or some teachers and some administrators, tended to stereotype our students if they were sagging or wearing a hoodie. And they did not feel a sense of belonging, right? So that's just a little example of how this process is working. We do circles on all three levels: the community building level, after harm has occurred, and the third level is for youth who are returning from a period of incarceration. What I want to say is that in 2010, based on the amazing results in terms of increased academic outcomes, in terms of lowered violence, in terms of lowered racial disparities, and other positive outcomes, the school district, and with some student organizing as well, the school district adopted restorative justice as official school discipline policy. And so now that is public policy. And so we started with one small pilot program. Today we have about 40 programs in a little bit more than half of the schools in Oakland School District. There is a $3 million budget. There are 40 full-time coordinators. I think it's the largest thus far in the nation. With that, I'd love to hear from you and have a conversation and learn from some of your work. And do you mind just saying who you are?
Sorry to interrupt. If you would, or set up a couple microphones in the front of the room, that way everybody can hear you clearly. Where am I? I'm hiding in the corner. Hey, Brandon, can you bring up the house lights a little bit? I think they're flickering. In the meantime, I'll give you this.
Hi, Fanya. Check
Hi.
two. My name's Alan Murdoch. We've met before
Oh, yes.
at the 4th and 5th National Conferences
Yes.
on Restorative Justice. It's not working. Oh, okay. All right, I just need to talk. My name's Alan Murdoch. I've been at the last couple NACRJ conferences. I was a child victim of sexual abuse from somebody who was freed through the intervention of restorative justice in Iowa. When my parents reported the offense to the coordinators, they kept it from the courts, and the offender was not taken back to prison until I found the television he stole and hid in our basement. And you know, in my own experience and study of restorative justice, what I've seen is that there seems to be a cognitive bias that people who believe in restorative justice are on the side of good, and anybody who might get in the way of that has to be kind of swept under the rug. And so I've run into these issues again and again, and I'm wondering, you know, your thoughts on how to handle these issues. When I look at Ann Grosmare's case, for example, I see 2 white government employees walking in and getting special privileges from the prosecutor. You know, when I look at some of these cases, I don't see them as the kind of justice that we hear when the Grosmares come and speak in front of the NACRJ.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you so much, Alan, for your question. And I'm very sorry to hear first about the harm that was caused. And secondly, it appears that another level of harm occurred with the restorative justice process that was used in your case. I don't know how long ago that was, but it sounds like it wasn't implemented with fidelity. It sounds like you were re-victimized. And I don't know if you had an encounter with the person who caused harm in the first place. But again, I'm very sorry to hear that. We are just beginning now, I don't know how long ago this was, to understand how to use restorative justice in cases of sexual assault. So back then, I can imagine that there wasn't, well, clearly, what happened in your case involved a very unskillful attempt. And then, you know, regarding the kind of cultish mentality that you describe, you know, I think that is problematic, obviously, because the whole point of restorative justice is to move away from either or, good, bad, right, wrong, you know, I got it right, you got it wrong, thinking. And I think that is what makes it so attractive to so many people. It's healing. The healing is based on, etymologically, on wholeness. So affirming our wholeness is what is so exciting about restorative justice. So engage in an either or, you know, right, wrong, good, bad debate. Again, for me, isn't faithful to the principles of restorative justice. I mean, I realize that I did that a little bit myself. This is retributive justice, and it only blames and punishes. And restorative justice heals. So I have to acknowledge that and also say that I do that exercise more as a pedagogical exercise, understanding that the beauty of restorative justice is that I see you in me. It's Ubuntu. I am because you are, and you are because I am. I am who I am because of my relationship with you and with others, other humans, and with all of the earth's inhabitants. So I'm very sorry to hear about that, and I hope to see you at the conference. You reminded me of the conference we're having in Oakland, June 16th, June 18th. It's a major conference, and you're invited. The theme is moving restorative justice from margins to center. We are the ones we've been waiting for, lifting historically marginalized voices, formerly incarcerated, youth, yes, women, LGBTQ. Yes, here. Mm-hmm.
Hi,
Hi.
My name is John DeSouza, and wanted to say I love that in your bio you include that you're a dancer. You mentioned at the conferences that there'll be Native American chanting, and you even had us shake our booties a little bit there. And I sincerely hope this isn't a silly question. But is there any point where dancing or even just music, me being a musician, that it intersects with the restorative justice process, maybe in circles or at any point, anytime, music or dancing, healing, not just personally, but interpersonally?
Yes. Very good question. Thank you. What's your name again?
John DeSouza.
John DeSouza.
August.
Absolutely. You know, when people got up and started moving and shaking their booties, you know, there was laughter. We felt united in a different kind of a way. Ceremony, historically, of indigenous peoples relied on music and dance. As my elder, Baba Credo Mutwa, says, yeah, somebody knows him? Yeah. Okay, great. That the gods love this. Words are okay, speaking is okay, but the gods love it when you sing to them. Yeah. And you know, ceremony, some studies have shown that ceremony, I can't remember the studies exactly, but ceremonies activate that part of our brain that dissolves separation. And I suppose it would be something like activating the, oh gosh, I think it must be the altitude sickness. What is the hormone that women emit when they're about to have a child? And the hormone? What? Oxytocin, yes. Okay, so there are studies that show that what happens in these ceremonies and what happens in these circles and what happens when we do music together and dance is that oxytocin is released, which is a bonding hormone, and it creates physically and physiologically connection. So we like to move when we do circles, probably not enough, because there's a tendency sometimes in the way that we practice restorative justice to just talk, to just sit around and talk. And you know, I think our bodies need something else, our spirits need something else, and so I'm always looking for ways to incorporate music and dance in our practice. Did I? Oh. But, oh, you've been waiting? Oh, sure. No, go ahead. No, I think it's good we were on that side of the room. Well, we'll do this side of the room. Okay.
Hello, everybody. I'm very nervous because I want to share something and invite everybody to see if we could work together on a project inspired by this day. 30 years ago, a group of us tried to bring a restorative justice model to Boulder County around domestic violence. The model was modeled after Australia, where we don't shame the people who have used violence. We actually create homes from the folks who have gone through what you might say creating or perpetrating violence on others, and they actually leave their homes. They actually are the folks that live in the homes and act as the advisors to other folks who get arrested for domestic violence. We brought this through AMEND, Abusive Men Exploring New Dimensions, sorry, I'm nervous, a program I worked for. We brought this 30 years to Boulder. We brought it to this area and we said, we don't want to use the language of victim and perpetrator anymore, because when we do circles together, we create two circles, and if you write down the word victim and you write down the word perpetrator and you fill them up and you then take away the names, they're exactly the same circles. So anyway, we worked very hard on this for 3 years, and we tried to bring it 30 years ago here, and it was rejected. And I believe that this community, through Naropa University, could be a model for the first in the United States that I know of that does this work. And I'd like to propose that there might be a way, if any of you are interested in this incredible restorative work, that we could work together to bring this model to Boulder, or to Denver, or to this area. So I just wanted to propose a challenge. My name is Diane Israel. If anybody wants to work with me on it, I would be ecstatic, because I trained in restorative justice 30 years ago. I've been using it, and it's now. It's now, just like so many other things that have been kind of put aside or told, not now. Thank you all.
Thank you. No, yes. What's your name?
Hi, Sister Davis. My name is Rashawn Bliss. You and I have actually connected
yeah.
through Harold Fields. I work for the National Coalition for Dialogue and Deliberation.
Yeah, I thought you were on the East Coast.
Yeah, no, I live here.
Oh, okay.
Well, I live in Denver. But before I start anything, I just want to say your shoes are so dope, and I really want some like them.
Thank you.
They're awesome.
And your name. I love your name.
Oh, thank you.
His last name is Bliss. Did you guys hear that?
My last name is Bliss, yeah. Sort of connected to what the sister was saying, I work for, my professional job, I work for like a professional nonprofit, the people who do dialogue work, and in my community time, I also run a group called the Denver Justice Project that is really invested in transforming law enforcement and mass incarceration, seeking racial justice. And some of the work that we're interested in doing is really in some ways moving a lot of the justice system, the criminal justice system, especially policing, toward real, actual practices, not just kind of like words about restorative practices, and shifting policing on the ground into restorative models. Yeah. And there's kind of moments where some of that feels more and less possible. And just this morning, maybe you've heard, there was a young queer trans woman named Jessie Hernandez, who was killed by the Denver Police Department 2 years ago. And just today, her family received a settlement of $1 million. The DPD kind of said that they are going to change a couple things and maybe acknowledge that the rule that they changed directly after Jessie's death of no longer allowing their officers to shoot into moving vehicles was because of that, instead of hiding it and saying, well, we were thinking about this anyway. But I raise that as an issue, as a kind of, this is a flashpoint where we could say we need more restoration, because this young woman was murdered. She was not attacking these officers, but she's gone, and that $1 million does not fill that hole. These apologies do not fill that hole, and the sort of the carceral state, a lot of the police infrastructure that we use force to enforce laws needs to be transformed. And I just wonder if you can offer some reflections on how do we get from here to there. How do we, what sorts of things would start? Especially, I'm thinking like locally at, a Denver level or a Boulder level. Like, what are the steps you would say that are important from moving from a place where we have this, force, violent, deadly force enforcement of law, and transform that system into something that starts to look more restorative?
Right.
Thoughts, ideas?
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for your statement and the question. Yeah, that question is up for us in a big way, especially with Black Lives Matter, and I have to just give it up to the youth who put this question on the map for us in this country and for the whole world to see. The question of police violence and state-sanctioned terror against Black people and people of color. I hope that the family of Jessica Hernandez finds some healing or some value in the way that it has turned out. Apparently they got a settlement of $1 million and some changes that you said took place. At the same time, that is not going to stop the police killings. And it's not because, in many ways, what we're seeing with the police killings comes from slavery. It goes all the way back to slavery. And that may sound like a leap, but slavery, and at its essence, was racial terror. It ended in 1865, 1870. But the racial terror that was at its essence continued. So that slavery morphed into lynchings. And those lynchings morphed into Jim Crow. We got rid of Jim Crow. Jim Crow has morphed into racialized mass incarceration and police violence. So what I'm starting to see is that is our original wound as a nation. And just as you psychologists know, when an individual, talking about individuals, but the principles apply to a nation, have a terrible trauma in their first years of life, and if that trauma is pushed under the rug, if that trauma is never talked about, it's never dealt with, it's never healed, it's never processed, what's going to happen? That trauma will perpetually reenact itself in different forms, right? Until you break the cycle by healing. In many respects, I think that's what's happening to us as a nation. So though we can change policies at police departments, we can create police review boards or police community control boards, we can pay out millions in reparations for police killings, or even for slavery for that matter. But if we do not do the interpersonal healing that is needed, that we need as a nation, then we'll get rid of mass incarceration, but it will come back to bite us in some other way. So that's why I think, as a warrior for justice, we need healing as well. We need justice and we need healing. We need that $1 million settlement, and there needs to be some healing. And what we can start doing, and cities across the nation, and different cities in different parts of the country are starting to do this, is to do circles, have racial healing dialogue. It's happening already. Many of us aren't aware of it because we hear all about the violence that occurs. That's front page international news, but we don't hear about the amazing healing work that's going on. And I don't have time to talk about that in depth today, but there is coming to the table. Coming to the table brings together descendants of slaves with descendants of slave owners. In some cases in the same bloodline. And some deep healing, racial healing happens. Of course, that racial dialogue has to be complemented by collective action. We can't just do the healing work and not do the collective action work. We can't just do the collective action and not do the healing. But the healing, if we're ever going to break that cycle of racial terror that continues to reenact itself, we need to engage in these processes, these encounters, and we need to address implicit bias and whiteness. And there's some great resources that are out there for that. There's Surge, Showing Up for Racial Justice. It's a group, it's white people organizing all over the country to address their own issues of whiteness and white supremacy. More of that kind of work needs to be done. And the healing work, police coming together with communities they serve. We've been doing that in Oakland. They even were doing it in Baltimore before Freddie Gray was killed. It's happening in Austin, Texas, where you can sit together and share stories and see each other as human beings instead of as categories, and connect in ways that in really deep ways. And we see this, I mean, if we can do it with families who have lost their loved ones and the killers of their loved ones, then I have a lot of hope that we can do it in respect to racial conflict. So restorative justice can be an important tool in helping us to create those safe spaces and those healing spaces. But it's not going to happen from Washington. Well, it's definitely not going to happen from Washington now, but, you know. But
the good thing about Trump is, like, he's so busy tweeting his every impression that he's not leading. So he's, in the absence of his leadership, all of these things can.
I don't know if you heard that. Trump is so busy tweeting, he's not really minding the store. So we can do all kinds of things, and he won't even know we're doing it. So this creates a space for us to engage in transformation. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Chuck says he's first.
So I know Candace is going to thank you, but I also just feel Candace has held the Peace Studies program at Naropa in her heart for so many years. So I just want to make sure that that's noted here. All yours.
Thank you, Chuck. I just noticed that Kathleen has a question, and there are a few other people here. And I want to honor the time as well. So I was wondering if we could hear the questions, and then Fania might have a...
It's your call.
Okay. How about if we just hear the questions, and then I'd like to extend an invitation. We're also having a tea with Fania at 4. If you have a burning question and you're not going to get a chance to ask it, just tap me on the shoulder and I'll let you know where the tea is. As I want to honor her time and give her a moment to rest in between events. So Kathleen, could we just hear your question? And
yeah, and I can be, is this working? I can be quick because I don't actually have a question, just an offering. I'm the executive director of Longmont Community Justice Partnership. We provide restorative justice services and trainings in Longmont, and we have a 20-year history working with the Longmont Police Department. They refer just under a quarter of all Longmont youth who are contacted by law enforcement each year to restorative justice instead of writing a ticket or making an arrest. So in response to Rashawn and others who may have a similar question about some small actionable steps, if you know somebody with openness or curiosity in your local public safety or law enforcement department who would like to hear from their peers, this is often a way to get more buy-in, is for officers to hear from other officers why you should even consider using restorative justice. Our Longmont police are very willing to go talk to others about how this works, from patrol officers, detectives, school resource officers, up to the commanders and the chief. You're welcome to contact me, and I can come and bring an officer to talk to your officers and try to encourage them to get on board, because it's really possible and it can be a reality.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Good work is happening here in Colorado. Amazing.
My name is Atma Khalsa, and my question is, just the background, and I'll make it very brief. I'm a Sikh. I grew up with the 3HO and Sikh Dharma community that's throughout the United States. We're international, and a big part of our lifestyle and practices through Kundalini Yoga. We're kind of the stewards of those teachings, and we hold the leadership of the Teachers Association that brings that into the world. And restorative justice is a part of our ethical practice in the way that we review and counsel our teacher membership. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about using restorative justice separate from coming in where harm has already happened, but more as a practice of building a community system that includes and provides for ways to manage anything that can happen in the future, and as a community, how restorative justice can help build boundaries and expectations for community behaviors, and so it's preventative as much as it is restorative.
Totally. I'm glad to hear that you're doing that. In our schools, we make it a point of using these circles, community building circles, 70% of the time, and the harm circles only 30% of the time. Because it's so important in creating that culture of connectivity, that culture of healing, to strengthen your community. There's just so many things you can do creatively using the circle process. And the structure of the circle is going to be the same, whether it's a harm circle or a community building circle. The 5 elements of the circle, very briefly, you've got ceremony. You're going to end and begin with ceremony. You're going to have a facilitator who's there to serve the circle, servant leadership. You're going to have a talking piece. You're going to make your decisions based on consensus. And what's the 5th one? Values. It's a values-based process. So whether it's a harm circle or a community building circle, those elements will be used, and amazing impacts will come from using circles in a preemptive and proactive way. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So maybe the next 2 people, if you could just be really brief, and we could hear from both of you, and then Fania can respond to both.
Yeah. Okay.
Buenas tardes, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Sedona Allen. I'm Peace Studies major here, and I'm an aspiring revolutionary. I just want to thank you for your words of wisdom and sharing those with the Naropa community. I've been a huge fan of you and your sister since like my middle school days. And something that really caught me in your presentation is this transformation that you seem to go through from, this very militant and intellectual warrior to finding a balance, with peaceful practice and healing. So my question is, what aspects of Marxism do you think resonate with restorative justice, and what aspects kind of conflict with restorative justice? Thank you.
Yes. Thank you.
The brief version. Okay. I'm the director of the National Center for School Engagement, and I believe, as such, I'm an advocate for restorative justice, but not a practitioner. And I believe wholeheartedly that when your teachers in the pilot concluded they did not have time not to practice restorative justice, that is absolutely true, and it's true for most, if not all, the schools in our country. But I can also guarantee that the thought is not there in most or all of the schools in the country. And they believe that they do not have time to practice restorative justice. So I'm wondering, but you also commented on the importance of implementing with fidelity. And I'm wondering if there is a place for implementing restorative practices that, move a school toward something more restorative and away from something punitive, but may not always involve a full restorative justice circle every time that there is a harm.
Yes. Yeah. All right, so starting with that question first, yes, you can do restorative conversations. That does not involve a circle process. And I think the community building circles is also an option because it doesn't require the time and the resources that the harm circles do. A teacher can be trained to do a community building circle like Ms. Awele's circle I was telling you about. They can be trained to do that in a matter of a few hours. And with some co-facilitation by a restorative justice practitioner, they can do the circles themselves. It's not at all long and involved as a harm circle might be. And then there are restorative conversations. The teachers can be trained in restorative conversations as well. So you can start with that, training the teachers and using those community building circles and training them in restorative conversations as well. Now your question, oh, okay. Yeah, so, you know, if you are Buddhist, and even if you're not a practicing Buddhist, as I said earlier, you're here at this school because you are committed to ending suffering. And you want to end suffering wherever you see it. And in my view, we live in a culture of harm. We live in a system that systematically creates suffering. And I'm talking about globalized capitalism. Yeah, I think if we are really interested in ending suffering, then it's important that we name capitalism as the perpetrator of suffering on almost every level, you know, economically for those in the Rust Belt, for those in the urban areas, for what's happening to our earth, what's happening, you know, with racism. Racism didn't even become a thing until slavery. Race doesn't exist genetically. There's no biological evidence for race. It was created. It's a social construct, and it came to justify slavery. And our system of capitalism is a racial system of capitalism. And so to be, I think, a restorative justice practitioner who's concerned about ending suffering, a Buddhist who's concerned about ending suffering, then we must be anti-capitalist as well. And I'm really interested in President Leaf's ideas about this, because he's dedicated his life to bringing about social transformation through social entrepreneurship. I'm sure certainly he has some alternative ideas about how we can create economic systems that are restorative instead of punitive and causing harm just all over the place. Yeah. So I think you're in charge here.
All right. So would you please join me in thanking Dr. Fania Davis for being here?
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Every step I take is a healing step. Every step I take is a healing step. Every step I take is a healing step.
Every step I take is a healing step.
Healing my body.
Healing my body.
Healing my community.
Healing my community.
Healing the earth.
Healing the earth.
Every breath I take is a healing breath.
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 Healing, healing, healing the body.
Healing, healing, healing the body.
Healing, healing, healing my community.
Healing, healing, healing my community.
Healing, healing, healing the earth.
Healing, healing, healing the earth.
Every step I take.
Every step I take.
Every breath I take.
Every breath I take.
Every step I take.
Every step I take.
Every breath I take.
Every breath I take.
All right.